There's a small muscle hidden deep inside your calf that almost nobody has ever heard of. Yet researchers discovered that activating this one tiny muscle, while simply sitting in a chair, improved blood sugar control by more than 50% in their study. That sounds almost impossible. In fact, when I first read the research, my first reaction wasn't excitement. It was skepticism. How could one muscle, making up only about 1% of your body weight, have that kind of effect? The answer turned out to be far more interesting than I expected. Because this isn't another miracle cure, it isn't another internet health trend, and it certainly doesn't replace exercise or a healthy diet. Instead, it reveals something your own body has been capable of doing all along, but almost nobody ever talks about. Here's why this matters. Blood sugar spikes after eating aren't just responsible for that familiar afternoon crash. Meal after meal, year after year, they quietly strain your blood vessels and your metabolism, often long before a diagnosis ever appears. But here's where this story takes an unexpected turn. Most people assume insulin does almost all the work of removing sugar from the bloodstream. It doesn't. Your muscles have another pathway, one that works largely independently of insulin, and this overlooked calf muscle appears to be exceptionally good at using it. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this muscle is uniquely built for the job, what the research actually found, what it didn't find, and one surprisingly simple movement you can start today while sitting exactly where you are. I think you'll also understand why so many headlines about this study got the story only half right. I'm Dr. William Mercer. I spend my time reviewing research on metabolism and healthy aging, then translating it into practical advice you can actually use without exaggeration, without miracle claims, and without leaving out the limitations that matter most. So let's begin with what actually happens inside your body after you eat. Every meal containing carbohydrates releases glucose into your bloodstream. In response, your pancreas releases insulin, helping move that glucose into your cells where it can be used for energy. When those blood sugar levels rise sharply and then fall just as quickly, the effects go beyond feeling tired. Over years, repeated spikes place stress on the delicate lining of your blood vessels, much like water flowing through a garden hose at excessive pressure day after day. One spike isn't the problem. Thousands of them over decades are what gradually begin to matter. Over time, something else begins to happen. Your cells can gradually stop responding to insulin as efficiently as they once did, a condition known as insulin resistance. To compensate, your pancreas produces even more insulin just to achieve the same result. This slow cycle can continue quietly for years before it eventually develops into type 2 diabetes. The challenging part is that most people don't feel it happening. By the time it's discovered, the process has often been underway for a long time. But here's something many people don't realize. Even if you never develop diabetes, blood sugar spikes still matter. Research increasingly suggests that frequent spikes can influence energy levels, mood, and long-term heart and metabolic health. This isn't simply a question of whether someone has diabetes or not. It's a spectrum that affects almost everyone. And this is where the story becomes much more interesting. Most people believe insulin is doing all the work of clearing sugar from the bloodstream. It isn't. Your muscles have a completely different way of removing glucose from your blood, and surprisingly, it has very little to do with insulin. Every time a muscle contracts, it can pull glucose directly out of the bloodstream through its own pathway. No extra insulin required. Scientists have known about this mechanism for years, and it's one of the reasons exercise has always been recommended for blood sugar control. But here's the discovery that surprised researchers. Not every muscle does this equally well. One small muscle appears to be unusually effective because it can keep working gently for hours without becoming exhausted. Imagine a building with two entrances. The front entrance is insulin, the route most people know about. But there's also a quieter side door that opens whenever a muscle is actively working. Every gentle contraction quietly opens that second door, allowing glucose to leave the bloodstream through an entirely different route. And that raises an obvious question. Which muscle is best at doing this? The answer is a muscle called the soleus. It's hidden underneath the larger calf muscle that most people notice in the mirror. You use it every time you stand, walk, or simply keep yourself balanced, yet most people have never heard its name. What makes it so unusual isn't where it's located, it's how it's built. Most muscles are designed for short bursts of effort. They tire, burn, and eventually need to rest. The soleus is different. It's made mostly of slow oxidative muscle fibers packed with mitochondria, the tiny energy-producing structures inside your cells. That unique design allows it to keep contracting gently for remarkably long periods without the burning fatigue you'd expect from exercises like repeated calf raises. And that unusual design turns out to be the key to everything researchers discovered next. Now comes the finding that made researchers stop and pay attention. The soleus makes up only about 1% of your body weight. On paper, it shouldn't have much influence at all, but that's not what researchers found. When this small muscle was activated continuously, it was able to double, and in some cases even triple, the body's carbohydrate burning compared with simply sitting still. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about one small muscle hidden beneath your calf, producing an effect that seems far larger than its size would ever suggest. In fact, researchers pointed out something even more remarkable. Although your body contains more than 600 muscles, this one small muscle appeared capable of making a disproportionately large contribution to how your body handled glucose after eating. One of the researchers even commented that they weren't aware of any current medication producing an effect of comparable magnitude under these specific experimental conditions. If you're thinking, that sounds almost unbelievable, you're not alone. That's exactly why the details of the study matter. Before we look at them, let me tell you about someone I'll call Arthur. Arthur was a retired accountant who spent much of his day sitting. Year after year, his blood sugar slowly crept higher. When his doctor mentioned activating the soleus, Arthur imagined another demanding exercise routine his knees probably wouldn't tolerate. But that wasn't what his doctor meant. The recommendation was surprisingly simple. A gentle movement he could perform while sitting in the same chair where he already spent part of every afternoon. And that's exactly what researchers decided to test. In 2022, Mark Hamilton and his colleagues at the University of Houston studied a movement they called the Soleus push-up. Participants drank a glucose solution and then either remained seated without moving or continuously performed this gentle calf contraction while researchers monitored what was happening inside their bodies. The results surprised even people familiar with exercise science. Compared with simply sitting still, participants performing the Soleus push-up showed about a 52% improvement in blood sugar control after the glucose drink. Even more surprising, their bodies required around 60% less insulin to manage that sugar over the following 3 hours. Researchers also observed roughly double the rate of fat burning during fasting and lower triglyceride levels, benefits that extended beyond what they originally expected to measure. Naturally, the next question was whether this would work only in healthy volunteers or in the people who needed it most. A follow-up pilot study focused on people with prediabetes. Even without laboratory equipment or real-time coaching, participants performing the movement at home experienced about 1/3 smaller blood sugar spikes during a standard glucose tolerance test. That point is easy to overlook, but it's incredibly important. It suggests this wasn't a technique that depended on perfect form or expensive laboratory conditions. Ordinary people, performing a simple movement imperfectly, still experienced measurable metabolic benefits. But before anyone concludes they've found a miracle, there's something equally important you need to know about these studies. Now, before anyone rushes off believing they've discovered a miracle, there's something important we need to talk about. One of the fastest ways to lose trust is to oversell promising research, and that's exactly what I don't want to do. Both of these studies were relatively small, involving only a limited number of participants. They were performed under carefully controlled laboratory conditions, and participants drank a glucose solution rather than eating an ordinary meal containing protein, fat, and fiber, all of which change the way blood sugar behaves. So let's keep this in perspective. This isn't a replacement for a healthy diet. It isn't a replacement for regular exercise. And it certainly isn't a magic cure. But none of that makes the findings any less interesting. What these studies do suggest is something much broader and, in many ways, much more practical. Your metabolism appears to reward movement throughout the entire day far more than many of us realize. Let's pause for just a moment, because we've uncovered three important ideas. First, repeated blood sugar spikes quietly accumulate over time. Second, your muscles have their own way of removing glucose from the bloodstream, one that works largely independently of insulin. And third, the Soleus is uniquely designed to keep using that pathway for long periods without becoming exhausted. But here's a common misunderstanding. Some people hear this and immediately think, so should I just work out even harder? Surprisingly, that's not what this research is saying. Intense exercise remains one of the best things you can do for your health, but it serves a different purpose. The benefit researchers observed with the Soleus came from something almost opposite: gentle, continuous muscle activity, sustained over long periods rather than short bursts of intense effort. Those aren't competing ideas. They're complementary. One doesn't replace the other. And that's where I think the real lesson begins. This research isn't really about one unusual calf muscle. It's about how we think about movement altogether. For years, many of us have believed that health depends almost entirely on the workout we squeeze into 30 or 60 minutes each day. Increasingly, research suggests that's only part of the picture. How often you move during the other 15 waking hours may matter far more than we once appreciated. That becomes especially important as we grow older. As muscle naturally declines with age, a process called sarcopenia, we gradually lose some of this natural glucose-clearing ability simply because we have less active muscle available to do the work. That's one more reason preserving muscle isn't only about staying strong or preventing falls. It's also part of protecting your metabolic health for years to come. So what does all of this actually look like in real life? Fortunately, it's remarkably simple. The Soleus push-up begins with both feet flat on the floor and your knees bent at roughly 90 degrees. Keeping the balls of your feet on the ground, slowly lift your heels, then lower them again at a comfortable, unhurried pace. The goal isn't to feel your calves burning. In fact, if they are, you're probably working too hard. The goal is gentle movement you could comfortably continue while reading, watching television, working at your desk, or talking with someone. And here's something many people find reassuring. You don't need perfect technique. Participants performing this movement without laboratory feedback still experienced measurable benefits, suggesting your body doesn't require perfection to respond. Consistency appears to matter much more than precision, but even if this particular exercise doesn't appeal to you, don't miss the bigger message. A 10-minute walk after a meal, standing up every so often, shifting your weight instead of remaining motionless for hours. Those small decisions may be doing far more for your metabolism than they seem. Because when researchers step back and look at the larger picture, they continue to find the same pattern. Your body was designed to move often, not just to exercise occasionally. If there's one idea I'd genuinely like you to remember from today's video, it's this. Looking after your blood sugar doesn't always require dramatic changes. More often, it's the small things you repeat consistently that quietly shape your health over the years. A few minutes of gentle movement after a meal, standing up a little more often, giving your muscles regular opportunities to do the job they were designed to do. Those habits may not feel impressive today, but years from now, they can add up to something remarkably important. That's one of the most encouraging things about this research. It reminds us that protecting our health isn't always about doing more. Sometimes it's simply about moving a little more often. And if someone came to mind while you were watching this, maybe a parent, a spouse, a friend who spends most of the day sitting or has been quietly worrying about their blood sugar, share this video with them. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone isn't another complicated health plan. It's showing them that one small, realistic habit can be worth starting today. Now I'm curious about something. Before watching this video, had you ever even heard of the soleus muscle? Just leave a simple yes or no in the comments. I read every one, and I'm always interested to see how familiar these overlooked topics already are. As always, everything we've discussed today is for educational purposes and shouldn't replace advice from your own healthcare professional. If you're living with diabetes, prediabetes, or other blood sugar concerns, it's important to discuss any changes with your doctor first. I'll leave you with one final thought. Most of us spend our lives searching for dramatic answers to complicated health problems. Yet sometimes the biggest difference comes from understanding something small that has been quietly working for us all along. In this case, it isn't a new medication. It isn't a new diet. It isn't an expensive piece of equipment. It's one small muscle patiently doing its job every time you choose to move. Take good care of yourself. I'll see you in the next video.